So the Timberwolves season is over, and it's a bit of a weird season to recap because prior to the season, I don't think there was a ton of optimism about them potentially being championship contenders, given that the year before they just weren't that good. Now, granted, they were not very healthy the prior year. They weren't really able to fully understand what the Cat-Gobert combo was going to look like. But still, coming into the year, the expectations weren't super high.
There is a scenario here where, because Anthony Edwards is so good, because he continues to make a leap to potentially being a top 10, maybe top 5 player in the league over the next couple of seasons, maybe Minnesota will be a contender with this Rudy Gobert era.
And then once we got partway through the postseason, it seemed like they were almost the favorites to win the title. And of course, they don't end up getting to the finals. And so when you think about their offseason, it makes it that much more complicated to figure out exactly what the direction of the team should be. Were they just a really, really good matchup against Denver, and that made us, more impressed with them than maybe we should have been? Or are they true legit contenders over the next couple of seasons? I think that this version of the team, at least going into the year next year, is one of the better teams in the Western Conference. Obviously, Dallas is good, OKC is good, Denver is good, the West is loaded, and it's going to continue to be the case. But Minnesota is going to be in contention, I think, at least for next season. And so this offseason, that's going to be where the focus is. How do they push this team towards a title? Now, in terms of free agency, there's only 2 guys really that are kind of important. Kyle Anderson and Monty Morris, both those guys are unrestricted free agents in terms of this upcoming offseason. And then into following off seasons, Rudy Gobert has a player option in the summer of 2025. I would expect him to pick that one up. It's $46 million. So realistically, Rudy Gobert is going to be on the team for 2 more seasons. And then beyond that, like Naz Reid is on the same schedule as Gobert, but McDaniels is signed long-term, and signed long-term, Cat signed long-term. So from a free agency perspective, no big issues there for Minnesota this offseason. Of course, that also means they don't have any cap space of their own this offseason. That also means that moving forward, this is going to be an expensive team. This is going to be a luxury tax team. This is going to be a team approaching $200 million worth of payroll. And they knew that at the time that they made the Gobert trade, and they didn't necessarily know that the rules were going to change from a salary perspective the way that they did when they did make the Gobert trade. But this is the situation that they're in now. And even given the fact that maybe they were a little bit disappointed by how their season ended up, by the time the postseason was over, I should say, I don't expect any kind of massive significant roster changes as it relates to just trying to cut money. They're going to be able to pay the guys, whoever the owner ends up being of the team is going to have to pay a pretty hefty price, but they shouldn't have to get rid of anybody just for money. Really quickly though, I want to thank the sponsor of today's video, PrizePicks. And with that, I have a special offer for you. You can click the link down in the description. You can use code SPORTING on PrizePicks for a 100% deposit match up to $100. With the NBA playoffs going on right now, this is a fantastic time to get started with PrizePicks, and they also have a ton of other options as well. You can see the free square on screen here. You can see all the other sports that they offer as well, and you can combine those with some of these NBA playoff games. If you feel like you have a decent idea of what might happen in a game, PrizePicks is an awesome way to just enhance your viewing experience. Essentially, you go on the site and you pick a handful of selections, you put them together, and if you're correct, you win some cash. Now, when I say correct, I mean more or less for each of these selections. So if you feel like one guy is going to score particularly well, you really like the matchup, you really like, maybe some of the defensive strategies you think are going to change in a given game, you feel like this guy's going to play well, that guy's not going to play well. It's not just points, there's all kinds of other categories as well, but essentially, that's all you do. You pick more or less, you get your selections, and you win some cash if you win. It's also important to keep an eye on some of these Demon and Goblins numbers as well. These red and green ones, the red ones are more difficult, which increase your payout, while the green ones are a little easier, but are a little bit lower of a payout. And also all these promotions that PrizePicks puts out. They have some discounts on some of these numbers at times throughout the week. They have a free square as well, as you can see on screen, which is essentially just a free selection within your group of selections. So all kinds of stuff going on PrizePicks right now, in addition to a 100% deposit match up to $100 when you use code SPORTING. You click the link in the description below. Again, that is a 100% deposit match up to $100 when you click the link in the description below at PrizePicks. And thank you again to PrizePicks for sponsoring this video. Now, when you look at the roster, there's not a ton of needs for Minnesota, but kind of similar to a lot of the other teams that they ended up at about the same time in the postseason as. They need a little bit more off the bench. They need, a perimeter creator off the bench that would help them. I wouldn't be surprised if they looked at potentially upgrading the Mike Conley spot. Obviously, they don't have a ton of future first-round picks. They don't have any future first-round picks, actually. And the assets on the roster aren't fantastic, but if they really wanted to, maybe they could look to upgrade that. I know they really value Mike Conley and what he brings, but in terms of just having another option, in terms of someone to finish games for them, I think would be good. And as we've talked about in previous videos, the offensive infrastructure around Ant needs a little bit more spacing, needs a little bit more creation, especially if they're obviously going to continue to go with the 2 bigs with Gobert and Cat in the front court. Speaking of Karl Anthony Towns, people are going to bring him up all offseason long, talking about him as a possible trade target. Can he go to the Knicks? Can he go to all these different teams? And I talked about it before the season, that Gobert is an asset you can't trade, and that Cat would probably get you some stuff. And if you really wanted to spread things throughout the roster, get in another creator, get some more spacing, get some wing depth, and you felt like there was a trade out there that you could kind of work where you get that in exchange for Karl Anthony Towns, that made sense for Minnesota before the year, and in certain ways it makes sense for them now. I just can't envision a scenario in which Minnesota is as successful as they were this year, arguably the most successful season in franchise history, and then they go and trade their second best player. You can talk about what you want about Cat. I'm not a huge Karl Anthony Towns guy, but like, I just can't see a scenario where a team that finally has some sense of stability trades not only their second best player, but a guy that is still obviously young and continuing to develop. I can't see that scenario. Maybe there are teams that call Minnesota and they try and see what they can get for him. Maybe they want to just go with Gobert, Ant, and then, you know, McDaniels and a couple other guys in the starting lineup. But I find that really hard to believe, even given, you know, potentially some issues you may see with Cat in the postseason. He was awesome in the first 2 rounds, by the way, but against Dallas, obviously not so much. And so where that lands Minnesota is in an interesting spot. It's a team that clearly needs a little bit of an upgrade on the wing, maybe a wing defender that has a little bit more size than McDaniels, who obviously has great length but isn't the biggest guy in the world. That was you know, very apparent when they tried to guard Luka unsuccessfully. That's certainly a need for them, just more wing depth, more bench depth, another creator. But at the end of the day, I think they have a championship caliber team. Even with this roster, they'll look to improve it, you know, replace some of the guys if they lose Anderson or Monty Morris. But it's a championship caliber team, and Anthony Edwards is 22 years old, and a big reason that they weren't able to advance to the finals was because he wasn't ready to match Luka and to match Kyrie late in these games. He wasn't ready to be that primary fourth quarter scorer. He was tired in the fourth quarters of these games because he was actually guarding and playing defense as well. And at some point, it's just like, yeah, we just need that guy to get to that point, and then we will be able to get past teams like Dallas that have some of these guys late in games that are really, really good. You can continue to improve the infrastructure. I've talked about the spacing. I've talked about, you know, having another creator and all that stuff, but you're waiting for Ant to get better. You're hoping that Cat continues to improve as a postseason player, and then you're going to be right there again next season. But the interesting part of that is that as we continue to revisit the Rudy Gobert trade, right? I mean, I think that a lot of people have seen it now as a success, with Minnesota getting to the conference finals and you know, at a certain point being seen as the championship favorite. This was kind of my concern with the Gobert trade in the first place, was like, you're making the trade assuming that Ant is going to be ready when he's 22 and he's 23 years old, because beyond this point, you basically have Gobert for 2 more years. And yes, you could re-sign him after that, but he's obviously going to be much older by then and certainly much less effective. And that was always the issue with the Gobert trade, was 1, how much they gave up, and 2, the timeline of it all. And it accounted for Ant being ready. And he was awesome early on in the playoffs, but when it came down to it and they really needed him in the conference finals, to no fault of his own, he's 22. You shouldn't expect the guy to be ready to go up against, you know, Luka and Kyrie, and these guys are some of the best late game scorers in the entire league. But that was the concept behind the Gobert trade, was like, we're going to be ready. We're going to add this guy, him and Cat. We're going to have this size, McDaniels, Ant. Those are our guys who are going to be at a guard, and then Ant's going to be good enough at the end of these games. And that just wasn't the case. So I'm not necessarily saying that it was a mistake or a bad trade or whatever. We're going to go back and forth on the Gobert trade probably 100 times over the next 2 years, right? But all I'm saying is you can see a little bit when you look at the salary cap table, when you look at the age of the team, when you see kind of where they finished this year, you can see a little bit why I was concerned about the timeline aspect of this for Minnesota as it relates to Ant. Now, the bottom line for them is that even, you know, beyond the next couple of seasons, Gobert leaves, whatever the case may be, maybe they have a disappointing year next year and they do move on from Karl Anthony Towns. They're going to be fine. Ant is awesome. And as he gets to age 25, 26, like, he is going to be an unbelievable player for them. It's obviously on them to continue to grow and improve and add pieces around him. And without the future cap space and draft picks and stuff, that's going to obviously get a little bit more difficult. But he's on a pretty good deal. Cat's on a pretty good deal. McDaniels is on a pretty good deal. Once the Gobert money comes off, maybe they'll have an opportunity to continue to add to the roster in some interesting ways around Ant. But that's really all it comes down to for them. The future is bright. They have Anthony Edwards. There are not very many 22, 23-year-old guys, under 25 guys I would pick ahead of Anthony Edwards to kind of lead the franchise with. And he seems like he's happy in Minnesota. He wants to continue to lead the team. And like I said, if you told Minnesota fans before the season, hey, you're going to end up in the conference finals, you're going to be a handful of games from making the finals, and at certain points you're going to look like the championship favorite, they would take that, even knowing that it didn't work out all the way for them. So a good season for them, fantastic season for them, progress. Now they need to figure out what the final pieces are along the margins in the offseason. And you just wait for Ant to continue to get better and hope that he becomes the guy that you thought that he was and hope that he would be when you made the Gobert trade.